My favourite quote of all time comes from a 19th century American called Ralph Waldo Emerson. Finish each day and be done with it. You've done what you could. Some blunders and absurdities no doubt crept in. Forget them as soon as you can. Tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense. I've always had this quote stuck on my laptop or hanging somewhere near my workspace. It talks to me more than any other inspiring quote can. Sure, I'm not saying that I follow it to the letter, but I sure as hell try. The problem I have is that at times I can be a little prone to catastrophizing, and so a little of Ralph's goodness can help me a long way. My catastrophizing sits in his quote where he uses the word absurdities. Because let's face it, most of the catastrophizing that I do, and I'm thinking you do too, are just a little bit absurd. It doesn't really matter how absurd my thinking may be or how well I understand how prevalent it can be, it still doesn't stop me from bounding over every logical barrier I put in its way to make such false claims or assertions. If I'm going to be fair on myself though, catastrophizing isn't a daily habit for me. In fact, I can go for a long time not really jumping to awful conclusions at all. Some have even commended me on keeping calm in some pretty dire straits. The problem arises when I haven't been looking after myself well enough. This might be different for you, but for me these occasions look like lack of quality sleep, procrastination, lack of physical exercise, uncertainty of the future, which has led to a nasty rash of anxiety, too many high-stake decisions needing to be made with little information to guide them. The list is often longer, but chances are that if the majority of these are in play, then catastrophizing is likely to gate crash the party. Journaling is always a great way of working your way out of this state of affairs though. I like to write down the problem that I'm facing and then come up with 3 or 4 different scenarios that might happen. Yep, one of these scenarios is the catastrophic one. I often write this particular outcome first to the far right-hand side of the page, and then I put in 2 or 3 other possibilities. After I've done this, I highlight the one that I think is most likely to happen. And I also highlight the option that I most want to happen. Invariably, this won't be the catastrophic one. Often beside each outcome, I also write a very brief plan about how I might respond if each of these scenarios come to fruition. This seems to work a treat and helps me clear my thinking in a very positive manner. It seems that catastrophizing isn't the only way that we have cognitive distortions, what I like to call my mind's funhouse mirror. Imagine your brain as a magical funhouse filled with mirrors. Some mirrors reflect reality, but others twist and distort what you see. These quirky mirrors are cognitive distortions, mental shortcuts or errors that warp how you think about yourself, others, or the world. They're not malicious, they're just a little misguided. Later on in this presentation, you'll find a whole heap of other catastrophizing-like cognitive distortions. When you see a list like this and start ticking them off as ways you think, you've got to wonder why we even bother getting out of bed each day. That's what makes Ralph Waldo Emerson's quote such a great one. Tomorrow is a new day. You shall begin it serenely and with too high a spirit to be encumbered with your old nonsense. Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to bring you this leadership module. Today we're talking about catastrophizing, understanding and managing negative thought patterns. As John Kabat-Zinn wisely put it, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. In this presentation, I'll discuss how leaders can better navigate the mental waves that come with stress, uncertainty and pressure, especially when negative thinking takes hold. So let's begin with the basics. What exactly is catastrophizing? At its core, catastrophizing is that unhelpful thinking that lurks in our minds, forcing our thoughts to leap to the worst-case scenario, often without any evidence that is remotely solid. It's that moment when a small issue, whether it be a late email reply, a change in tone, a minor mistake, spirals into some imagined disaster. We find ourselves saying things like, "This is going to ruin everything," or "I've completely blown it." It's irrational, but it feels very real and in the moment. In fact, it's so real that we believe that it's true. The danger is when we're stuck in this mindset, we react not to reality, but to our imagined worst-case version of it. For leaders, this matters deeply. Your response shapes how others feel. If you're catastrophizing, you're likely to project anxiety, lose clarity, or make reactive decisions that ripple through your team or organization. And the worst thing? Well, catastrophizing often comes from a good place. It comes from that place that wants to prevent harm, solve problems, or be prepared. But when it dominates our thinking, it stops being helpful and starts becoming really harmful. The first step to managing it is to simply recognize it. Once you can name it, you can start to tame it. Catastrophizing is just one of several cognitive distortions, which are like mental shortcuts or habits of thinking that can really distort how we see reality. Each of these distortions on their own can cause trouble, but when they team up, especially during periods of uncertainty, during those times when it feels like anything and everything is about to hit the can, well, they can make everything feel bigger, scarier, and more overwhelming than it really is. As leaders, being able to spot these patterns in yourself and your team is a vital step towards calmer, more rational decision making. So let's look at a few other common ones that often show up in leadership and team dynamics. Mind reading. Now this is when we assume that we know what someone else is thinking, usually something negative. For example, you might tell yourself, yeah, she didn't respond to my idea in the meeting. She must think I'm stupid, or it was a stupid idea. Or, oh, yeah, he gave me that funny look in the corridor. What have I done wrong? But the truth is, we don't know what's going on in someone else's head unless we ask. This distortion fuels misunderstanding, conflict, and unnecessary stress. What about labeling? Well, this is when we turn one experience or mistake into a sweeping identity statement. I missed that deadline. I'm such a failure. That's a classic label. As leaders, we sometimes do this to ourselves or even unconsciously to others. It's unproductive and it can erode confidence fast. We need to separate actions from identity. What about negative focus? Well, this is when we ignore the good and zoom in only on what went wrong. And the more that we zoom in, the uglier it gets. It's that tendency to leave a performance review thinking only about the one bit of constructive feedback, not the 10 things that went well. It can be really toxic in teams where, there's constant focus on problems and it shuts down motivation and innovation. What about fortune telling? Well, this is one when we convince ourselves that we already know how something will turn out, and it's usually badly. There's no way this change will work, or the team's going to hate this. It's so self-defeating. Instead of exploring possibilities or trying something new, we stay stuck in inaction or resistance. Each of these distortions on their own can cause trouble, but when they team up, especially during periods of uncertainty, they can make everything feel bigger, scarier, and more overwhelming than it really is. As a leader, spotting these patterns in yourself and your team is a vital step towards calmer, more rational decision-making. So let's get back to catastrophizing though. Often this sort of thinking occurs in the middle of the night when we lie awake, tossing and turning both literally and metaphorically, trying to sort something out. So why does it really matter? Well, not only can catastrophizing play havoc with our sleeping, it can paralyze your decision making. You freeze up or make rash calls. It can also hurt your credibility as a leader. And over time, this habit increases stress and anxiety across your whole team. So let's look more closely at some of the ways that we can mitigate our catastrophizing as a leader. First of all, self-awareness. It all starts with knowing yourself. As leaders, we're not immune to negative thinking. In fact, the pressure to get it right can make catastrophizing more common. I certainly spent a fair amount of my time catastrophizing. You might catch yourself thinking, if I don't solve this today, everything's going to fall apart, or this mistake is going to ruin my credibility. The trouble is, if we're unaware of these patterns, they can drive our decisions, often in unhelpful ways. Self-awareness lets us pause, question our thinking, and choose a better example. What about leading by example? Well, whether we realize it or not, our emotional tone sets the atmosphere. The team around you are actually incredibly good at picking up your emotional tone. If we're visibly stressed as a leader, spiraling into worst-case scenarios, others will pick up on that and they will mirror it. But if we stay grounded and curious, even when the pressure's on, we give permission for others to do the same. Your calm presence in the storm builds trust and psychological safety. What about effective communication? Well, when there's uncertainty or tension, people start filling in the blanks with fear. Catastrophizing thrives in silence and vagueness. It's like a virus that seems to mutate in the absence of effective intent. That's why clear, honest, and reassuring communication is so powerful. It doesn't mean pretending that everything's fine. It just means naming the challenge without fueling the panic and offering realistic steps forward. Well, as leaders, we're also coaches. You know that. So we need to spot when team members are spiraling into their own catastrophizing and gently help them to find a more balanced perspective. So what would that sound like? Well, maybe it sounds a bit like this. What evidence do we have that this will definitely go wrong? Or you might say, what's the most likely scenario, not just the worst? These questions help people shift from fear to clarity, and that's where better decisions happen. In short, leadership isn't just about managing work, it's about managing mindset. In fact, I'd argue that a big chunk of your leadership role is about managing mindset, and that starts with your own. So what can leaders do when catastrophizing shows up in ourselves or in our teams? Well, this section outlines 4 awesome core strategies that help create a more grounded, resilient leadership environment. Actually, don't think of them as strategies at all. Think of them more as habits of leadership. When we practice these consistently, they help build cultures where calm thinking and shared problem solving become the norm, even in difficult times. Let's talk first about how we encourage dialogue. First and foremost, let's create safe spaces for people to speak up. When we bottle things up, fears fester. But when we talk openly, fears often shrink. And that old saying, a problem shared is a problem halved, it really does run so true. So ask open questions like, what's worrying you about this change? Or what's the worst case scenario you're imagining? Bringing these thoughts into the light is the first step in making them manageable. When you normalize talking about uncertainty, it helps build trust and also reduces the power of these catastrophic thoughts. Aligning with values. When things get tough, it's easy to lose our way and default to panic-driven decisions. That's why it's important to consistently reconnect our decisions and challenges to our shared values. Ask yourself and your team, what really matters here? Maybe it's learning, maybe it's integrity or community or well-being, I don't know. But when actions are aligned with values, fear loses its grip and confidence increases, even in the unknown. Another key leadership move is reframing, especially reframing challenges. Instead of saying, this is a disaster, try, this is hard, but it's also a chance to learn or grow. This isn't toxic positivity. It's not denying the hard stuff. It's choosing to look at challenges as opportunities for insight, development, and innovation. The way you describe a challenge can completely shift how your team approaches it. What about validating concerns? Well, yeah, that's a good one. This is actually a big one because we often want to rush in and fix the thinking. But before we do that, we need to just validate how someone's feeling. Say things like, it makes sense that you're feeling anxious, or that's a really common concern. Validation doesn't mean that you're agreeing with the catastrophic thought. It means acknowledging the emotion that comes with it. It's really important. Then once someone feels seen and heard, we can help them separate facts from fears and shift those thoughts to a clearer view of what's really going on. One of the most powerful ways to counter catastrophizing, both in yourself and your team, is to actively promote a growth mindset. As coined by Carol Dweck, a growth mindset is the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through effort, learning, and feedback, not something fixed or predetermined. It's essential for leaders trying to build resilient, reflective teams. Let's take a closer look at how this plays out in practice. As a leader, when you promote a growth mindset, talk about mistakes as part of the process, not just the end of the road. When things go wrong, we ask, what can we do to learn from this, instead of who messed up? This takes the sting out of failure and allows your team to take calculated risks without being paralyzed by fear of getting it wrong. In fact, it makes failure feel like just a part of the overall process. So you can say things like, setbacks are signals, not stop signs. And let's look at what this challenge is teaching us. When failure is normalized as a source of growth, catastrophizing just simply loses its fuel. Catastrophizing often comes from focusing only on what's not working. A growth mindset actually flips the script a bit. It actively seeks out and celebrates progress, not just perfection. So take time to notice the small wins, especially during periods of change or pressure. Publicly recognizing effort, adaptation, and persistence is actually really good. This, rewires the team's focus towards what's improving, not what's missing. And in these cases, you can say things like, yeah, that was a pretty tough week, but we still achieved these 3 things. Let's not lose sight of that. This approach builds confidence and dampens the noise of unhelpful negative thinking. Curiosity is the antidote to catastrophizing. When someone is spiraling into the worst case scenarios, shift them from judgment to inquiry. These are great questions to ask. What else might be true here? What haven't we considered yet? What would it look like if this went right? You see, curiosity pulls people out of rigid fear-based thinking and back into open, solution-focused exploration. In team culture, this looks like encouraging questions, reflection, and experimentation, not needing all the answers up front. In short, a growth mindset isn't just about individual development. It's a collective mental posture that allows your team to stay calm, flexible, and focused when things get tough. It creates a culture where fear is replaced with learning and where catastrophizing has far less room to take hold. One of the best ways we have for managing catastrophizing is this: shifting from emotion-led assumptions to fact-based thinking. When we're in a catastrophizing state, our brain is essentially running a worst-case scenario loop, going over and over and over again, disconnected from any kind of reality. Fact-based risk analysis helps break that loop. Let's unpack the 3 key elements. First of all, let's talk about a balanced assessment. Start by challenging black and white thinking. Catastrophizing often sounds like, oh, this is definitely going to be a disaster, or yeah, nothing's going to work, or we've done this before and it's not going to be good. But in truth, most situations have a spectrum of possible outcomes, some good, some bad, and many somewhere in between. So as leaders, we need to ask things like, what are all the possible outcomes? What's the best case? What's the worst case? What's most likely? Encourage your team to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, balancing emotion with objectivity. What about probability thinking? Yeah, well, that's a good one. Next, we ask, how likely is this to happen? This simple question can cut through panic and bring people back to a more realistic footing. It helps to reframe thoughts like, what's the actual evidence that this worst case scenario will occur? Or, has this happened before? If so, how often? Or, even if it did happen, how could we handle it? This isn't about ignoring risk, it's about putting it in perspective. Our brains are wired to overestimate danger and underestimate our ability to respond. Probability thinking recalibrates that. Let's talk about focus on control now. You see, catastrophizing thrives on powerlessness. That's why it's crucial to separate what we can influence and what we can't. So we need to ask questions like, what's within our control right now? And what actions can we take even if the situation is uncertain? You see, this gives our team agency, and that's incredibly grounding. Instead of spiraling, people start moving. Even small steps in the right direction reduce anxiety and build confidence. In leadership, fact-based risk analysis is a game changer. It replaces panic with clarity. It helps your team stay grounded and focused on what matters, especially in times of ambiguity, change, or crisis. Ultimately, it moves us from reacting emotionally to responding wisely. Okay, so we're almost there. Let's take a look at the key points. Firstly, recognize the pattern. Catastrophizing happens, but it can be managed. Secondly, lead with balance. Your calm mindset sets the tone. If your emotions are out of control and for everyone to see, then don't be surprised if everyone else is feeling a little catastrophic themselves. Thirdly, work hard to build team resilience. Help others see that setbacks are not the end, but often just the start of learning. Encourage a positive mindset in not only yourself, but in everyone around you. And finally, a quote to leave you with: overthinking, the art of creating problems that weren't even there. I love this one. Perfection sums it all up brilliantly.